I mean, just they've just in this first paragraph here, it's like in the future you may find yourself eating eggs made of plants, fruit fly larvae, energy bars, or your favorite soft drink sweetened with a computer-designed 0 kilojoule sugar-free protein. All very interesting stuff. I think the thing that really caught my eye was that Mediterranean fruit fly larvae that they were talking about, that they could use 100% of the material, so there's no wastage at all. But they do manage to they extract an oil. They extract fat out of it and an oil that they can sell to cosmetic companies, and then the remaining powder is 70% protein and 12% minerals. So the fact that there's so much whole protein in there is very useful, and leads to a lot of opportunities in terms of what they could potentially create out of it. I don't know why they can't just get cracking on this stuff quicker, really. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is an example, but I'm sure there's lots of other ways that potentially solve the same issue.
There are lots of problems with this. So
okay, I'll let you take over then.
I actually know a lot about this. So firstly, I'm 100% on board with this, and it's fantastic. And in fact, that whole article was a great article, but there's a whole lot of things that they're not saying in that article. So there's no waste, sure. But, I mean, you have to think about the volumes that you require. And if you think of the size of a fruit fly larva, which is just a couple of mil, think how many of those you'd need personally for a meal, right? And the size. Right, so just think of the size. So if you just thought, say, for a day's worth of fruit fly larvae as food, you needed the size of a house brick. All right, have a look outside and look at a house which has probably got about 10,000 bricks in it or something like that. That's 10,000 people for a day. And if you had to produce that every day, suddenly you need very, very large plants to achieve the scale. So these are still the issues that burn. This is why we need large areas open to crops. So don't get me wrong, these are all great techniques and great opportunities. The idea of, growing insects and grinding them up and putting them into flours and fortifying foods is probably the way it has to go, simply because of the volumes that are required. So this is why, even though it's such a great idea, it's got this hurdle at the moment on how they get to the scale to really make it economic. And the other side is they already have done all the research. It's very hard to convince someone to eat a meal of 100% fruit fly larva.
Well, unless you tell them it's something else, of course.
Which you're not allowed to. Well, I don't know. What's the rebel waffle?
If they break it down and turn it into something else, who knows?
Rebel waffles?
Exactly. But just on that, in terms of the scale, isn't that, barring some whiz bang spectacular breakthrough that can solve that problem, isn't that just inherent? Because it's even like with just production now, you need a lot of material to make the material, because you're transferring it from one form into another. So you can't just magically create it out of thin air kind of thing. It's got to come from somewhere.
So you're spot on. So if you think about it, to get those larvae or to get the larvae going, they'll need some sort of substrate. It might be as simple as sugared water. But you still need sugar, you still need water, you still need to get it there. And then, you have to have that food for them to grow. Now, it might be all right to, make 1,000 meals a day for people that way. But how do you make 100,000 meals a day? How do you make 1,000,000 meals a day? And these are the issues. So they're scale issues, and they are right across every industry now when it comes to these sorts of technologies.
I guess then the comparison would be, okay, you need a lot of larvae, but what about the meat industry needing a lot of cows right now, and the effect that that's having on the environment, and that we don't think about? It's the same. Well, I mean, which one is that? Does it become a question of which one is worse to manage, or what could be potentially worse?
Well, it's exactly, but the problems associated with scaling up production of your insect or larvae or recombinant yeasts producing factors is purely that it's just how do you get to that size? It's a lot of vats. You look at the wine industry; they have a lot of tanks. The really big winemakers, and yet if you were to do that and you were harvesting a product like some sort of factor or protein expressed by yeast, or whether it was fruit fly larva, you've still got all the processing that comes after, and you've got to maintain that constantly. So, I'm all for these new technologies. I think there's no question if you move to an alternative protein that's the same cost as meat, that ethically there's no argument for eating meat anymore that I can see. They won't stop people eating meat, but,
it might just become more expensive an option, as like we've sort of mentioned in the past, potentially. Yeah.
Well, it would. If you can bring down these products to the same cost as meat, then it would put pressure on the meat industry. Then you would have less cattle, and then you would have less people eating meat. But they still probably have another decade to go. I really wonder. I guess your Impossible Foods and your Rebel Whoppers, they're made from plant material, so they have enough stock, and you can just put it into a standard processing plant to create your meats, or relatively normal meat processing kind of plant to extrude it and get your packaging. You can't do that with larvae. So these haven't been developed yet. Hopefully over the next 10 years they will, and this will revolutionise the way we eat.
Absolutely. So what about the idea then, if we're trying to wrap it up, the idea that perhaps it's more about a combination of factors that are going to get there. So if they start to introduce this a little bit, and then maybe they come up with something else, and then something else, and then maybe it's just a combination of things that can maybe assist with the scale. And maybe what was it, that thing you mentioned offline the other week about, it'd be good if you could only eat once a week, and that it'd satisfy your nutritional requirements.
I think there's probably about three things, and the Israeli sort of food tech industry is amazing. Like, they've really embraced it. In that article, it also talks about computer design sweeteners. Well, that's not a new technique. They've been using it in pharmaceutical industry to design new drugs, and now they're just applying it to sweeteners and to get specialist products for food.
Yeah.
But their knowledge and what they will do will in time revolutionise the industry. And I think there are three areas here. One is space food, which will see us eat less in space and get better nutrition through fortification of foodstuffs. And I think what you might see is that your Rebel Whopper, unfortunately, the patty isn't really that good for you, not to mention the rest of the stuff on the plate. Maybe the tomato and lettuce and onions okay, but I'm not sure about anything else. But if you could fortify that or get more flavour using these techniques or using these insect-based additives, then why not? And then, as you said before, that's probably the best way for these foods to develop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for people to access them at a reasonable price with a good nutritional profile.